Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do on Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. to try and figure out the future of smart buildings. So glad that you're able to be with us today. In case you're wondering who we are listed on mondaylive.org. And also to note, the views expressed here are personal and not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind. Do put questions and comments on the Zoom chat to make this as interactive as we can. That's always produces a better show when we do that. So looking forward to that. And also this deck is available on mondaylive.org in case you're wondering if you want any of the links or anything from it. So the month of November, we've decided to talk about how software is eating buildings. And this is kind of a play on Mark Andreessen's statement about software is eating the world. So the buildings is obviously our world. So this is what this is all about. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about software eating buildings, but specifically, what does the word open mean when it comes to software? I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion around that, because that's obviously a key word and a key concept for us in this industry. And then we'll have a chat about that. But before we go there, I'm going to hand it over to Ken Sinclair for an update from Automated Buildings. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Anto. Okay, we're hard at putting together our AHR program. We're starting to populate and get everybody committed to doing their sessions. I'm extremely pleased with the variety of folks we've got. I think the thing that always becomes evident to me is as I organize this thing for the last, this is our 26th year, the companies keep moving around, but the constant things is the people who kind of keep moving over at least a 10-year window and maybe more 20s and 30-year windows, and how they change the different companies, and the industry kind of evolves, but it is certainly powered by the people. And so I think that's a connection that Automated Buildings has to keep, is try to pull this community together, because it doesn't much matter who they're working for now. In all likelihood, in a couple of years, they'll be working for somebody else, and they'll take that experiences they've had today with them. So that's an important piece. And over on the right-hand side there, we had last week we had all of our editors, and I've got Dave there, and Dave has changed companies quite a few times. He started with us almost in the beginning of the new version of Automated Buildings, came on as a consultant, and then started working for a supplier, and then on to another adventure and another adventure, but constantly providing us input. And I think that provides the mosaic and the importance of our industry, is people like that have that long term. And of course, Keith is another one of our contributing editors, and Anto not so much, but he's there, but he doesn't contribute that much. Anyway, we've done a summation.
Was that a dig?
Pardon?
Was that a dig?
What a
to
dig.
get something written?
Yeah. Actually, Rick, don't you smile either.
I was going to say, I've been trying for 30 years to get away from my slave driver boss, but I can't get away from him. So he just keeps with me. Every company I go to, he follows me.
But anyway, yeah, it's an important piece, I think, is because they are changing, their stories are changing. But what we did is we took last week's Monday Live, and we've turned it into the next stage, which is the software eating buildings. Are we ready for the feast? And Kelly and AI took a swipe at that, and I think it came out fairly well. So it's a great journey we're on here. We're starting to get a lot of interest from a lot of people. I'm seeing a lot of people following us that have not followed us before. As we move into the open cloud AI worlds, people are interested in what we are doing. So I'm really pleased with all the content you're giving us and the fact that we were able to display it. Back to you, Anto.
Yeah, I was just looking at this this AI generated image compared to the one that I created last week. This one looks healthier.
Well, not
More
naturally.
salad, less carbs, more veggies.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. So well done. Yeah, thanks for that. The community link board, I didn't have any slides for myself today. That's as normal. Anything else anybody want to bring up before we move on? Hearing nothing, so let us move on. With our topic of the month, how software is eating buildings. What we talked about this last week. I just put this here just to remind us, just in case we've forgotten. And what we want to talk about is really what does open mean in the software world. And part of that sort of the motivation for doing this is that software has very sort of strong meaning to us in the BAS world. Typically, when we're talking about open, we're talking about these things: BACnet and Modbus and standards like Haystack and Brick and these kinds of organizations. This is kind of our sort of the go-to sort of way of thinking about open. But the software industry obviously is very different. And so I put this slide together with the help of a few AI friends of mine, sort of trying to think of what is open in software world. And there are lots of things that's open. So what I did was broke it down to 4 different types of sort of or areas of being open. And the first one is open standards and protocol. So there is open standards, there is open protocol similar to the way we think about things. But here we're talking about things like HTML and SQL, which are standardized either through some standardization process or by de facto, like SQL is effectively, somebody said that back in the 60s or 70s, if I remember correctly, and that's pretty much what it is. Open APIs sort of fall into this. So there's a lot of APIs out there, and quite a lot of them are open. Like the example here is Twitter and Google Maps. They're obviously APIs that anybody can access in an open way. So that's kind of the reference there of open. Another big area is open telemetry. This is telemetry is the sort of the signals that devices and systems create when something happens. It's become sort of standardized, and it's become this sort of an open way of making the telemetry signals all sort of understandable by different systems. So these are kind of some of the open stuff in software world when it comes to standards and protocols. Another area, big area of open when it comes to software is open data and open access. So open data itself is a thing. If you think of a lot of data sets that's available for the public, everything from sort of weather related to sort of historical and actuaries and things like that. So all of that is open data. Open access is talking about the ability to access content and material and data sets in a sort of much more open and available way for anybody to be able to access without barriers. And there's a whole range of things to do with open authorization, which is all about security. OAuth, which is something that we pretty much each of us use every day, many times as we log in and out of things. That's all part of the sort of how open is sort of used in the software world. Open algorithms, maybe more to do with sort of things like machine learnings, and probably Keith gets involved in that kind of stuff. So that's all sort of open areas of open. The sort of the main sort of area that sort of I tend to gravitate, and I think a lot of people tend to gravitate with open in software world is this one, which is open code and development. So the main one here is open source software, which is now really been sort of modeled around either Linux or Apache, two organizations that sort of defines how open source software is managed and handled. Open collaboration, which are really about tools, GitHub being the sort of the main tool for this in terms of software development. And then the whole development process going all the way from writing code to specification, all the way to testing, using tools, DevOps kind of tools. So there's a lot of open stuff here. And the last category is really open systems, open ecosystems and governance, which is really about how to manage all of these different open things that we've talked about. So open platforms are sort of platforms where anybody can develop stuff for that platform. Right. Sort of interestingly enough, open platforms may actually be proprietary, or it may actually be open itself in terms of the technology. That's not the same as being open the fact that a platform is open. Right. So Salesforce is effectively an open platform because anybody can go and learn how to develop a Salesforce app and do it. There's very little barriers involved to do that. And obviously things like Android and WordPress are platforms, and there are many other platforms, including platforms that come into our space. Open architecture is obviously important, so that all of the pieces in a sort of modular kind of composable manner can actually fit with each other in a larger architecture that is inherently open. So you can actually build stuff that fit into that. Open governance is really about what the organizations like Linux Foundation and other organizations, how they operate to govern decision making, being fair to all of the different contributors and other people, and all of that. That's a big area to do with governance. And then lastly here, open licenses, which is the way we actually license typically software, but it doesn't have to be software. It can actually be specifications and other things can be open using a number of sort of relatively well-known licensing model, including MIT and Apache and GPL and others. So there's a lot here. And this is probably not exhaustive. We can probably find other sort of things that should be on this list, but I think it should give us a good start. And I think the way we may want to look at this is sort of think about which one is really sort of drawing us into this sort of discussion. To me, being a software guy, open source software is kind of the linchpin out of this whole thing, because that is what has changed very, very significantly. When I started writing software 30, 40 years ago, none of this existed. So you had to write basically everything. If you want to write an application or a program, as it used to be called back then, you had to write everything from the infrastructure of what you need all the way to the actual application and logic and everything else. And over the years, people have started to create modules and things that you can plug in, and those modules have initially became sort of shareware kind of thing, and now the whole sort of open source, the way you do open source has been sort of formalized. And I think that's really sort of a big deal, and it's a big thing that sort of has driven the software world significantly forward. But I'd like to put this out there and get your thoughts onto what you think is sort of resonate with you out of this list, or if this list itself is sort of interesting or too large, or your thoughts on it.
I'll jump in and start. First of all, this is a fantastic slide, Anto. Thank you for putting that together, because there is so much misunderstanding about the term open, and it's kind of thrown out there in a cavalier sort of a way, trying to be all encompassing, and it really does mean different things in different areas. And it's not quite the free for all that some might like you to believe out there, that you throw it up there and there's no security and there's no control and there's no support and so on and so forth. And we all know that work in the software area, that's just not the case, obviously. The other thing that stands out to me on this slide is to do what we're trying to do here, to create truly open buildings, and here I go using that word generically. You really need a little bit of all of this stuff to pull that off. So it's not just open code or Linux or protocols or open data. I mean, you really need the complete ecosystem to pull off where we're trying to move the industry. And again, this slide really kind of explains and illustrates the different parts of that.
Yeah, it's almost like, what could you do without? What would you cross off?
Right.
And that kind of doesn't make sense very quickly.
Yeah. And different parts of this are more important at different points in the evolution here as we move forward too, right? So that's the other thing. This doesn't all happen all at once. And together it happens at different times and at different levels and different volumes, if you will. So that's an important thing to remember here too. It's kind of all a big squishy, moving sort of ecosystem that we're playing in here, and it's all important. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
To kick it off.
I'll jump in too. Thank you, Anto, for putting this together. I agree. It's a great place to start. Knowing that I agree with everything, unless I say something. The two critiques I would offer is, the first, under standards and protocols, I think it's so important to have standardized data itself. And that's the thing our industry is greatly lacking, is actually any kind of framework for the data itself. And in accounting, they have pretty standard ways of putting things together. There are lots of examples of standardized data sets for, different industries and things. And the real estate industry is sorely lacking in data standards, which makes all of these things extraordinarily challenging and inefficient. So I would strongly suggest we add like data standardization and data frameworks under the standards and protocols, because
that's kind of on our to-do list that you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the second critique is that under open ecosystems and governance, I would actually suggest having the software licensing things actually under the open code and development. And the reason I think that, I mean, I can see it in both places, but I think having open ecosystems and governance is maybe a higher level of how people work together. And the open licensing is so central to the code, and people can have open code and open source and not necessarily have any license at all. And in that case, it actually technically isn't open, and or you could run into future troubles. And so much about using open code and open source code has to deal with those licenses. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I feel like the software licensing should be under that because it's something you cannot not pay attention to. I've seen many projects that take different open source things and then the licensing changes, and companies don't even know that that code is in their code stack and have problems. So it's something that you really need to pay attention to.
But your last point that you made, I think both points are valid, but the very last point you made is really about governance.
For sure. And I can see how it can be in both places. It's
Yeah.
not a hill to die on by any stretch, but I think it's a thing that or at least in the open code area, saying how licensing is something you always have to pay attention to on the development side.
Yeah. Your first comment about the lack of data structure, the standardization of data structures is obviously a great point, especially for this group. And it's sort of, it's what we've been talking about in many ways. But to me, it's kind of interesting because I did not make this list up. Like, it came from AI, right? Which means it came from the world, right? So the world didn't put that in here, which means that so far for the rest
Well,
of
it
the
means
world,
I must be wrong then.
no, the whole world must be wrong, which is okay.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of missing that part, or it's doing it by being able to ascertain data from just the open data and just the way the data algorithms provided. But
I think the one thing that kind of strikes me a little with all this as well is that when you look at it, they're all actually tools. They're not a solution. Anything you look at here, even the data, it's only when it comes in a specific format. It's not the answer. Every one of these are things that allow you to get to where you want to be a lot quicker, because you don't need to actually go off and develop these things anymore. A little bit like you said at the beginning, and so where you had to develop a lot of this stuff to actually make it all work. And it's no different than pretty much what technology, even AI itself, is really. It's just helping you get to where you need to quicker. And if you don't ask the right questions of AI, you'll get the wrong question. You won't get to where you want to as an individual. And I think each one of these, as you look at them, are just helping people move on a lot quicker and get to where they need to in a much shorter time. Because as a business, you still would have to build on these to make an offering. They're just a platform in a lot of instances.
Like Tracy, I really applaud this slide. I think it's very helpful. The one thing the slide doesn't speak to at a high level is the notion of OT versus IT. Okay. So if you think about our industry going back 40 plus years, OT is dominated by embedded devices. And those embedded devices were designed to be configured, supported, installed by non-programmers. So you think of the first PLCs, they were done in ladder logic. So much of what we do in building automation is either done with configuration sheets or some kind of a wire sheet. So again, the audience for doing the work are non-programmers. Okay? And in terms of the proliferation of embedded devices, it's enormous. Right? I mean, there's just all kinds of manufacturers, all kinds of examples of embedded devices. And in the IT world, other than perhaps routers and switches, until recently, those were your embedded devices. Then smartphones came along, and all of a sudden, you got billions of smartphones out there. So now embedded devices are proliferation at a level that goes beyond what we do in the OT world. And they're doing it on the basis of IT technologies. Although, Android, came along to make an embedded operating system, and Linux as well. But that doesn't mean our industry, our OT industry has moved in lockstep with that. Some have, some haven't, right? And so we've got this, because we've recognized the importance of data and the importance of accessibility to that data, the OT industry, you know, whether it wants to or not, is trying to make this leap into the IT world, and is, you know, I like moving to the cloud, using browser technology. You know, it's been frankly a painful journey, not one that everybody has wanted to embrace necessarily. And because it isn't the world we've grown up in. And similarly, the IT industry has no incentive to understand our world. So it behooves us, if we want to take advantage of this, what you're calling the open software world, okay, which is my argument is being driven by IT, not by OT, okay? So that's where it's coming from. And so it's a fundamental shift in worldview, if you will, for how the OT industry needs to look at itself and design its products going forward. We're not going to win. We're not going to get them to come over to us. We need to embrace their way of doing things if we're going to really leverage all the capabilities of openness as it's described on this slide. But it's not easy for us because we haven't had to do it historically. And we are so much an embedded world, whether it's a light switch or a light fixture rather, or a HVAC controller or a thermostat. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on in terms of the types of embedded devices we put into buildings today. And like I said, the only major volume play out there on the IT side is the phone, right? So it's very much, I just want to point out that challenge between OT and IT is part of the reason we're having a difficulty moving into the software world, because it's not natural for us. It's not the world.
I think there's a reason it's not natural, Steve, and that's monetary. If you look at the IT world, we're freely able to open and adopt the IT standards.
What?
But if you look at how they're being paid for, right, it's usually through these vast models with a much larger ecosystem.
Right.
We're down in a small ecosystem, and it's very hard for us to monetize in the same way they can open features. So it's hard for us to be, it's easy for us to be consumers of what they do. It's very hard for us to be producers of what they do. So we can use them, but it's hard for us to join them because it's hard for us to get paid with the very small number of customers and small number of eyeballs that we have to work with.
Yeah, because we're talking, you know, what, 10 million buildings worldwide, maybe 15, 20.
Right.
We're in the millions and they're in the billions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our industry dwarfs the IT industry.
In terms of node count, it does, but in terms of eyeballs and ability to monetize, it doesn't. You know, the entire hardware shipments in North America of building automation controllers are in the $2 billion range. That isn't even lunch money in these other businesses, Rick.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess I'm looking beyond controls. I'm thinking the industry of buildings and digital buildings. And that's
right. If you look at real estate, I would still say it doesn't dwarf. It does when residential is taken into account, but for commercial, it's big numbers, but it's not that big.
Yeah,
the software industry believes that it is. That's what I'm saying. Is this one of the largest areas of growth, according to a few fairly important software entities.
That's good. Let's keep them thinking that.
I have a couple comments, 2 or 3 actually. But so yeah, we're not, controls companies are not software companies. You know, we're not. It's an afterthought. I mean, I remember, I'm not going to name the name, but it's a toss-up. It's a 50-50 chance of which main building control company I worked for, they needed a front end for a piece of hardware they had just developed. And it was like, who knows how to program? And it's like, oh, and the supervisor's son, service supervisor's sons, supervisor said, my son's taking a community college course. Maybe he could throw together something. Like, that's a real true story. Okay, that's how it is. It's an afterthought.
Right.
It's an afterthought. We're not software companies. I am. I've been doing enterprise software for 30 years. So, I mean, I am a software company, and I've always been just about in my professional career. And the thing about it is what we're not, software is not our main job, and it's not our main business, and it's not our main, now I'm throwing on my controls hat, but it's not our main competence. And that's why we struggle with it.
And it's not our revenue source either, Keith, right?
No, it's not. It's mine. I mean, that's what I'm
Right.
selling. I'm building automation systems. I'm selling enterprise software systems and frameworks and solutions. But so as far as the chart goes, I think the AI missed something on the red one to the left. I think it had it in the header, open standards and protocol. But at the end of the day, the one thing I'm looking for is open protocols that allow me to read and write points and schedules.
Right.
I don't care if it's open source versus private. And so you see on the open data and accessibility, the first two are open data and open access, and then the open authorization. Where's the open protocol one? So there.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point that I think Steve or Roger brought
Yeah.
up. Somebody brought.
Missing. There's a bullet point missing on the left.
Yeah.
Open protocol. That's really all I care about, to be honest. And it doesn't have to be an API. All APIs are open protocol, but all open protocols are not open APIs.
But about us, about the BAS industry not being a software industry. In many ways, what we're saying this month, that software is eating buildings as part of the whole software is eating the world.
Yeah, somebody else's software, I would say.
Well, okay.
Why would you grant that to somebody else when we're being invited to be the authors of that software, which you've obviously picked up, Keith? You've obviously picked that up and said, I'm going to author my own software. I'm just saying to the group, this isn't an IT versus OT. This isn't we have to go buy their stuff and bow down to the. We're being invited to be the authors of this new software-defined industry. And if you've already got a company, you've already got business cards, why would you not say, I want to be the company that writes the software that changes our industry? And frankly, I'm going to spend the rest of the week at this thing called KubeCon, which is the Linux Foundation's CNCF annual conference. Thanks, Ken, for getting me the ticket to do that. I'm going on behalf of Automated Buildings to snoop around and be a reporter, which is what I get to do. And then part of that, also been invited to go to the Red Hat Linux party on Wednesday night, which that should be fun. But we're being invited to write that software that defines our future. And frankly, we're also being invited to do, 3 other things, which are all on here. We're being invited to set the standards and specs, to do the end-to-end blueprints and solution roadmaps, and to figure out how certification and compliance would work. So we're being invited to take the lead on all this stuff again. And there's an awful lot of people betting an awful lot of bazillions of dollars, NVIDIA, Apple, Oracle, saying that software will be what defines real estate, construction, design, maintenance, energy. Those are massive industries, and they're going to be overhauled through software. We're being invited to be the ones that help define that, which I feel like is a hell of a tip of the cap to say, you guys are the experts. I'd hate for us to be quoted as saying, we're going to let somebody else do that.
I think you're both right. I think historically we have not been software centric as an industry. But going forward, I think that's part of the evolution. We have to become software centric. That's where the value add is going forward
So
on building controls.
here's the thing, which is more likely at this point, especially, 30 years of doing this, 35 years, is it more likely that the hardware people, like the controls companies, are going to finally figure out that software is eating everybody's lunch? Or is it going to be the software people that are going to figure out that it's pretty damn easy to cobble together a controller with 18 points on it?
Yeah, that
So-
happens all the time already. We bump into that all the time.
I'm tired of it.
We,
I'm tired
well,
of
you know
letting the
what,
software people do that.
what I see is people implementing solutions in our world that aren't using hardware from traditional building automation companies, right? It'll be a PLC or some kind of industrial IO device, or yeah, a Raspberry Pi, or BeagleBone, or you name it. And that's what's going on as much as anything. Because to them, hardware is just generic. It's all the same. You turn things on and off, and as long as they can write to it, that's all they care about. So
And I'll drop it, but the they and us, it's not going to be that for long. It's all we.
it's going to be them or none of us if we don't evolve.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Guys, Keith, I hear you when you say that, that historically we haven't had to be experts in software. On the other hand, I don't, two things. One is the companies that have emerged as leaders have, frankly, and I've been part of a couple of them, have done so on the back of software, have done it because of the value they created in their software. So I don't know, I don't fundamentally agree with your assertion that software doesn't matter in our industry. It does. But to Jim's point about the size of our industry, I've watched folks, whether it's IBM or United Technologies or Cisco, get very excited about our industry in the past. And then after 5 or 6 years of not making any money, they pull out because the volume's not there. And I just don't buy the fact that suddenly Oracle and any of the other big players are going to transform our industry and extract volume where there's no volume.
Yeah, but you know what, the sword they fell on was connectivity. It always comes back to that. Like I wrote the first Cisco Mediator driver. See, I wrote the Johnson driver for the Mediator back when it was Ed Richards' company. I mean, so it's the driver and the connectivity. We're right back to the connectivity here. That's why they fell on the sword, because they thought it would be easy to integrate into, a BAS is just like a router. No, it's not. They got their butts kicked and they went back to making routers, and HP got they went back to making.
I hear you, but besides the connectivity, at the end of the day, when you compare the volumes of routers and switches they make to the number of controllers they might have been able to sell, equivalent to Ed Richards, box, which was basically a Tritium competitor, it doesn't amount to crap in terms of volume.
I agree.
It just doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. We agree. We're in violent agreement.
Yes, I agree.
But I think that, if you look at the other big problem, Steve, is that there has not been a market to monetize software sales. I've also been doing enterprise software for 25 years in this industry. And the only way we found that we can reliably monetize it is through a service, and not just software as a service, but an overall service. And I think that, that is something that is really where that evolution needs to take place. I'm very sensitive to what Rick is saying, and I absolutely agree that we ought to jump on this opportunity.
Right.
But let's not be fooled that there are line item budgets to buy enterprise software in this space. Not yet. That is the entrepreneurial leap we need to turn this into a business.
And
not really a technology problem.
It's not. And let me clarify, I never said that software wasn't important to the controls company or the industry. I said we put my technician hat on. We don't do software very well. That's what I said.
Okay. Right. Sorry.
Bring it back to open, because that is the, that's the theme. Open will make all of this easier for the market to adopt. The open is being articulated as being desired. Could be that the attempts in the past by the people who've come in, software companies, I worked for one or two, that came in with oh, we're going to use new technology, but we're going to use proprietarily. Guess what? Fell on their face, or falling on their face. God help them. Coming into the market with new tricks, proprietary gets rejected. Perhaps coming into the market with open as the lead will be accepted. And there's other people on the call out here that are very big advocates of the open approach, and they see with a benefit to their companies, software companies, a lot of them, solution companies, some, of leading with what the owners want, what customers want is open. So that's probably the fifth box that should have been laid across all of this. It's like, by the way, this is what owners want, open. I mean, maybe it's not just being called out, but it makes a world of difference to the market if you bring a solution forward that adopts some of these open approaches.
Going back to something Jim was saying earlier, of course, is that if, as you're saying, Rick, there's a lot more standards to come and we embrace it wholly, then some way the businesses that are engaged today are going to have to find some other way of monetizing it, i.e. they've got to actually make a living out of what's out there. Whereas before, yep, some of this was how they did it. As it becomes, open and there's other solutions, and the AI, can actually write the software to tell you the pump comes on before the chiller and so on and so on. I think, what is going to be interesting to see is how people will monetize the solutions in our industry.
So assuming that is done, because if there's a need, if there's a big enough need, we'll figure out how to do it. Does that not basically reframe this industry to be a software-driven industry? Or could it not be reframed to be that way? Once we figured out how to make money out of the software that will actually make the buildings better for the owners that's looking for that.
I think, Anto, that one of the problems is that the industry is not priced or based or transacted on value. It's transacted on counting the number of IO ports that are in the system and multiplying by a number today. And that new construction job costing mechanism doesn't take into account value. Enterprise software sales, everything we're talking about here, open, is once again on the operating side of the building, and not today. Most systems are justified and monetized by the cost of installing a control system in a building, which is a given.
But doesn't that where we match the changes to the sort of the angle that Rick comes at, which is the fact that building owners are actually needing to do something different. They don't just need to control the HVAC. They kind of know that that's anybody can do that, but they actually want
completely agree. But we need to see owners take control of the process, which I haven't seen yet. I'm very hopeful for seeing that, and I know that Rick has seen it. But in general, I don't see that as a major sweep across the market right now, where forward-looking owners are taking control of projects.
But assuming that happens, if that were to happen, you can see the scenario where software becomes more important. Software becomes something that can be assigned value directly to it, as opposed to
Absolutely.
just being in support.
Absolutely. But that transition to value has to make scale.
That's fair.
I wonder also, and so going back to what you said about the software and what it may evolve, is that it may well actually separate those who've got to provide the mechanical services from the people who used to do from top to bottom. You know, if you take, we're already kind of evolving to some extent, because it used to be the companies that developed the software, the tools, the controllers, did everything from top to bottom, and then SIs started getting involved. Now there's MSIs and more. So it's kind of perhaps in that evolution now where you're breaking it open and people are just providing controllers and people like SIs are providing the applications. But it could be that it just keeps on driving and separates it even more to the point where you have those that provide the field services as opposed to, you know, the applications and the software that sit above. I mean,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, that's what the bigger companies used to do, didn't they? Used to provide everything from top to bottom on this, but it was all proprietary. And that's actually being forced to change.
Yeah, and that's likely to be satisfied by a new class of vendor, surely, right? Because the sort of the old class of vendor is not the obvious one to do that because of the difficulty that we've seen in just adopting these principles.
Hmm.
So Chris on chat mentioned that open commerce is not on this list, which is a good point.
That is a big part of this whole thing. Part of what plagues our industry has nothing to do with technology or how open it is. It's the sales channel and licensing. That's what keeps a lot of things locked, proprietary. And when I say things, that's what keeps owners in a position of being locked
Right.
lots of times. So
Because the lack of openness is forcing the industry to behave a certain way. That is basically the reason why we are where we are, with lots of walled gardens.
And Duncan just added to that with the people flying the open flag to knowingly lead their customers, victims, into a walled garden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's another one that's
real
actually
problem.
not on here, and I don't think it's used in the software world too much, which is open distribution.
Yeah.
Yep.
We've seen that as being something that's changed how we behave, but not really properly, because that's a good way of inserting proprietary technology into a lot of hands, right?
That's part of what I was inferring to. If you don't have a choice of where you purchase this or whom you purchase it from, where you can get what we used to call sustainable competitive advantage as a building owner, then you're not in a truly open commerce, open market situation, right?
Both before and after, Tracy. So it's maintenance as well as distribution.
Yep. Keenly sensitive and aware of that very thing from my lawn works days. So
So if the controls companies aren't making billions of dollars out of off of software sales. What are they making that money from? It's service. I mean, this is like, look at Sears, Kenmore. The most profitable business unit of Sears was their Kenmore service trucks and service component. In fact, that actually lived. Did you know that actually lived after Sears went bankrupt? Like that was bringing in the vast majority, and it's I'm sorry, it's the same way for the controls industry, man. It's like just get it in, don't just make $1, just don't lose money on the install, because we know bread and butter, decade after decade of locked in service. Like that's the dirty little secret, right? And it's not a secret, we all know this.
But you know, Keith, in the UK industry, all the major guys no longer own or get any service.
Yeah, I'd heard that, Roger. Somebody
I
actually,
mean, 75% of systems are installed by system integrators, and none of the manufacturers are really, well, there's a couple left, but their service departments are dying. And those pulled out.
I entertained a gentleman from a company from the UK on Friday in person. They flew out here, talking about like an OEM reseller, and he explained that dynamic. I've heard that more than one time about the UK. It's much different than the US. So yeah, that's interesting.
Can it be said that that was helped by openness?
Yeah.
Well,
it was one of the drivers. People, I mean, it's a small enough industry that it's, people there were one or two companies that were kind of, really screwing the customers with their service contracts. And I think as those people who own buildings got less and less, so you're dealing more with people who knew what they were doing buildings, they just said, we're not having any of that. We're going to other people to, for the supply of our products. And that's why 75% of the market is now system integrators with, products that any one of them can buy actually and provide the solutions. That's been going on since about the 80s, end of the 80s.
It was way bigger in the UK than it was in the United States. And you're right. I mean, it was a MSI market, and they were using, EasyIO. In fact, I believe when EasyIO got bought, didn't JCI buy like not both of them or something? I'm not sure, but I don't want to start any controversy or anything, but I do know that EasyIO drove a lot of that, and the business model was different over here in the States with EasyIO versus the UK. At least I was told. That's what I was told as an EasyIO dealer.
So what I'm trying to get from that is that's a trend towards openness that building owners obviously like.
Absolutely.
Right? It aligned with their sort of thinking.
Best of breed, all that stuff. But yeah, that's a great point, Roger. I had heard that. I mean, I actually was an EasyIO dealer 4 years ago.
Yeah, we were selling it too.
Yep. That's right. Yep. That's as far I'll go on that.
So for this industry to be driven by software, trying to choose my words, is aligned with everything that we've been talking about, what's happened in the UK. It's aligned with that, right? Openness is a different kind of openness. It's kind of the ability to basically for building owner not to be screwed. That's kind of a type of openness. That's open commerce, I think what Chris is saying. So that's a good thing. That points us in the right direction. What we're talking about here is just focusing on the software because it is open. So the two seems to me to be like, drawing the picture of what this industry could be that can actually deliver this sort of value, new type of value to owners. If we behave in this manner, maybe that's the way to think about it. Or is that too much to ask?
Not too much to ask, but I guess the challenge comes back down to some of the things that Jim always says is how long will it take our industry to actually, adopt this approach with with the software solutions because I
Who's
think they're
that?
still
Who's that?
probably protecting their base.
Who does that depend on?
I think
Well,
it
yeah.
depends on owners.
Yeah.
Well, owners are, we've already went through this. The owners are sending a signal in the UK that they prefer this way of doing business. Right?
But they're,
We're
but
starting
they're
to
still
see
going through the contractual chain of mechanical contractors and
they have no choice.
yeah, so that's got to change a little, right? Too.
Okay.
Those are like Brexit for controls. Not that I'm saying I'm gonna be an insurrectionist or anything like that. I don't want to get in trouble. But seriously, there's got to be a rising up, and it's, you know, the owners. I agree. It's got to be on the owners.
Chicken and egg here.
Yep.
Can you point to an industry that has as much as a before and after as we do with the construction of an asset? What also has a before piece and an after piece?
PCs, IBM, and the clones and the compatibles.
Honestly, the data industry, people bought or leased a mainframe architecture for, the duration of the business. It wasn't they weren't disposable. Mainframes were not. So, but that's 40 years ago.
Microsoft ended up being they capitalized on that, on the software eating the hardware, computer hardware market. So not IBM specifically, but that's what enabled it. And to a certain extent, I would say Intel as well with the operating system.
I agree, Keith, that software eats that in that scenario, but I don't see the business of computing as being having a before and after as I'm defining it.
Okay.
Which is basically different constituencies that are in charge of different parts of the economic process.
Well, this is where, again, if we broaden and this is what we're doing at the coalition, C4SB, as we're going to continue to call it, we're defining what we are impacting as design, construction, operate, maintain. The energy part is a small part. The digital decisions being made across the life cycle of a building will have $1 trillion arbitrage opportunity a year. And so by defining what we're doing as turning on and off chillers, we're really limiting ourselves because that's not what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to use our approach to understanding that to apply to all the software that affects every decision that's made in the entire total cost of ownership. That's massive. So
I agree.
And that's what we're being invited to do because we have the experience with the hardest part. Well, Keith does. The rest of us just pretend like we were with Keith when he did all that stuff. But we have experience with the hardest part, which is, as Ken has said, where you do turn on and off the stuff, where you do touch the actual hardware. That's the hard part they haven't been able to figure out. But we've got the opportunity to redefine the software approach for the entire life cycle of real estate, construction, buildings, and obviously mechanical systems. So that's the framing and that's the attitude and that's the role that we're being asked to step into, which is fantastic.
Rick, I agree with you. I think it is fantastic, and I think we should embrace it. In a sense, I view it, however, more as a defensive measure than necessarily finally finding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I guess I'm too jaded to think that suddenly we're going to, turn a $2 billion industry into a $20 billion industry. However, when I say defensive, where I'm going is everybody on this call, we're a generation on our way out. And the generation, sorry, Rick, that's coming in. Our world is not their world. And we have an opportunity to lead and start to embrace the open thinking and the technologies that characterize it into this industry. Let's take advantage of it. Because what we'll be doing by doing that is we're making it much easier for us to hire and bring into our industry the people who are coming out of college and out of trade schools and to join our industry and contribute to it. Because they're not going to recognize what the hell we've been doing for 40 years. So let's understand that that's the fundamental problem. And the closer we can make our industry look like the IT industry and embrace open, the better our industry is going to be in terms of, thriving, at least within the context of what we consider thriving today.
I think one of our underlying shortcomings here is we're talking about our industry as it exists today, and really it's completely different. It's far more encompassing in terms of going beyond the traditional building automation apps of HVAC and lighting and so forth. And that's the part that we have to keep in mind, as well as complete integration with all of the other verticals that sort of already exist because of buildings, in terms of like real estate tech and so forth. And pulling all of that together, I think, is really what we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking about a much bigger pie than what we currently are seeing in the fridge, so to speak.
I think there's also this transition, how it's going to happen is owners, we identified a great disconnect between the owners and what we're doing. And I think when you see an owner that is going to embrace what we're talking about and actually pull us through that and is going to sort of create that system, and that, again, I go way back to my old DDC stuff. That made the change. It was when the owners actually embraced it and made it part of their mandate. So I think it'll be a similar kind of solution that'll get us over the hump and get some good working examples out there. But I think there's enough information, and I think we're providing feedstock for that. So good stuff.
So I think the last three comments from Steve, Tracy, and Ken kind of just wrapped up this show nicely. Thank you, and we'll obviously continue this for another couple of weeks as we dig into how software is eating buildings. So let's bring this to a wrap. We're over our time. Thank you all. Thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great week. See you next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.